One day, the greatest empire on Earth simply stopped. No final battle, no single villain, no last stand anyone wrote a poem about. The soldiers still had their swords, the granaries still had grain. And yet, within a generation, the cities emptied. The roads went quiet. Why does that keep happening? You have been taught that empires fall the way a tower falls. One dramatic push, one barbarian at the gate, one battle that ends it all. That story is clean. It is satisfying. It is almost always wrong. Real collapse looks different. It looks slow. It looks boring, right up until it isn't. Historians who study this pattern across cultures keep finding the same quiet warning signs buried in tax records and pottery shards centuries before anyone alive at the time noticed anything was wrong. Let's start with Rome, because Rome is the one everyone thinks they understand. By the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire controlled less land, less coin, and less loyalty than it had 200 years earlier. The legions were still marching, the Senate still met, but something underneath had already given way. Archaeologist Brian Ward Perkins spent years studying the physical evidence left behind, not the writings of emperors, but the actual dirt. Roof tile thickness, cattle bone size, pottery quality, and what he found was consistent decline across the empire, decades before any single invasion could be blamed. Cattle got smaller? That sounds trivial. It isn't. Smaller livestock means less specialized breeding, which means fewer stable markets, which means trade networks were already thinning out. People weren't investing in the future anymore. Why keep breeding better cattle for a market that might not exist next year? That is the real collapse, not a sword. A shrug. Anthropologist Joseph Tainter looked at this same pattern across dozens of vanished societies, from the Maya to the Chacones of the American Southwest, and found something almost mathematical underneath the chaos. Complex societies solve problems by adding complexity. More administrators, more layers of bureaucracy, more specialized roles. It works, for a while. Then each new layer costs more than it returns. Tainter called it declining marginal returns on complexity. In plain terms, eventually, the empire spends more energy holding itself together than it gets back from holding together. Rome kept adding legions to defend a border that kept growing. It kept adding tax collectors to fund those legions. It kept adding administrators to manage the tax collectors. At some point, the whole structure was running just to feed itself. Not to grow. Not to protect its people. Just to survive its own weight. Does that sound familiar yet? Now go back further, to the Late Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE, when not one empire fell, but nearly all of them did, almost at once. Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenaean Greece, coastal cities across the eastern Mediterranean. Within roughly 50 years, this entire interconnected world of trade and diplomacy simply came apart. For a long time, historians blamed a single mysterious group called the Sea Peoples, raiders who supposedly swept through and burned everything. It made a great villain, but classicist Eric Klein, who spent decades piecing together this collapse, found something messier and more believable. Not one cause, a perfect storm of them. Drought, earthquakes, famine, broken trade routes, internal revolts. Each factor alone, these societies might have survived. Together, they overwhelmed systems that had never been built with redundancy. That word matters. Redundancy. A system with backups can absorb a shock. A system running at maximum efficiency with every resource already accounted for cannot. The Bronze Age palace economies were extraordinarily efficient. Every scribe, every ledger, every shipment of tin and copper was tightly coordinated. That efficiency was their strength for 300 years. Then it became the reason they had nothing left when 4 crises hit at once. Efficiency and resilience are not the same thing. Sometimes they are opposites. Consider the Maya, centuries later and an ocean away, facing an eerily similar pattern. Their great lowland cities, places like Tikal and Copan, did not fall to an invading army. Climate scientists studying lake sediment cores found evidence of a series of severe droughts striking the region between the 8th and 10th centuries. But the Maya had survived droughts before. What was different this time? By then, the population had grown enormous. The land had been pushed to its limit through intensive agriculture. The political system rested on kings who claimed a divine ability to bring rain. When the rain didn't come, the kings didn't just lose crops. They lost their entire claim to legitimacy. Why follow a ruler who promises to control the sky and cannot? City after city stopped building monuments, stopped recording dates on their stone stelae, not because they were destroyed in a single moment, but because the reason to keep building had quietly disappeared. Do you see the pattern forming yet? Environmental strain, a system stretched past its buffer, a ruling structure that loses its legitimacy right when people need it most. The Western Han Dynasty in China, the Indus Valley cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, the Akkadian Empire under Naram-Sin, which archaeological evidence increasingly links to a sudden, centuries-long dry period across Mesopotamia. Different centuries, different continents, different gods, languages, and architecture. And yet the underlying mechanics rhyme with almost uncomfortable precision. It is never just the barbarians. It is never just the drought. It is never just the plague, or the debt, or the corrupt official. It is always the moment when a society's built-in slack runs out, right as several problems arrive together, and the systems designed to hold everything up turn out to be the very things that make bending impossible. There is something else these collapses share. Something less discussed than climate or invasion. Inequality. In nearly every case historians have studied closely, from Rome to the Maya to the Bronze Age palace states, the gap between elites and everyone else widened sharply in the decades before collapse. Elites hoarded resources during hard times instead of redistributing them. Ordinary people, the farmers and laborers whose labor actually held the empire together, had less and less reason to stay loyal when the crisis hit. That is worth sitting with. Empires rarely die from an external enemy alone. They die when the people inside them quietly stop believing the system is worth defending. So what does any of this actually teach us, standing here now, in a world of supply chains, power grids, and systems more interconnected than Rome or the Maya could have imagined? Complexity is not free. Every layer of bureaucracy, every stretched supply line, every system running at maximum efficiency with no slack left over is a bet that nothing unexpected will happen at the same time as something else unexpected. Sometimes that bet pays off for centuries. Sometimes it doesn't. The people living through these collapses rarely knew they were living through one. There was no single morning when Rome fell, no single year the Maya vanished. It happened gradually, then all at once, mistaken for a temporary setback right up until it wasn't. That may be the most unsettling truth in all of this. Collapse rarely announces itself. It just quietly removes your margin for error, one drought, one debt, one broken trade route at a time, until the day arrives when there is no margin left. The soldiers still had their swords, the granaries still had grain, and it fell anyway.